So I have set myself the challenge of building the ultimate crit circuit racing bike. But what does that actually mean? There's a few things that I had to consider, and I'll give you a full rundown on everything in a second. Today we are building what I would say is probably the ultimate crit racing bike. Welcome back to the What Life. Let's roll. So I've done a load of crit and road racing this year, and sometimes things like this tend to happen. It's obviously not ideal, but I do often go to a race and wonder whether I'm going to come out unscathed, and just as importantly, whether my bike is going to come out unscathed. Because technically, yes, the best bike to go crit racing on is the best bike in the world. But there's a few things I would like to consider when trying to build up what I would say is my ultimate crit racing bike. And cost definitely comes into it. I'd love someone to turn up to Hillingdon Cat 3-4 race on a Nago Y1 RS. I mean, that would be awesome. But also maybe a bit foolhardy. So part of my consideration for building up a new bike is using components that are really high quality, but not the kind of top tier when it comes to cost. So hopefully it's definitely not a cheap AliExpress style build, but we are trying to save some money here and there. So it kind of depends on the parts of a bike that you want to focus on when it comes to crit racing. So we are going to build up this bike today, but for me, when it comes to building a crit bike, I want a very solid frame that's firm and fast, and I've custom spray painted my own Winspace T1550 Gen 2 frame. So this is like a bare carbon look. Would I recommend spray painting a frame? The first time is difficult. I think now that I've done it once, I would be a lot better at doing it, but I still think it's come out incredibly well. So this is going to be a one-of-one crit racing bike, and that's going to be my second point, which is a crit racing bike has to look awesome. I don't know whether you guys watch much crit racing on social media or on YouTube, but it looks awesome, and especially on the US scene, there's definitely a certain joie de vivre to it, and it has a certain amount of kudos that I'm hoping we can bring to the UK. So having a cool crit racing bike, in my mind, is probably the number one factor. I obviously don't want it to be a complete dog when it comes to performing, and I think a frame like this isn't going to be. It's firm, it's low, it's slightly longer, it's got a really good stack height on it that will keep me low, and I'm going to build this up today. We will get there. So one of the things I actually think you don't need to spend a huge amount of money on is actually your group set. I don't think you need like a really high-end Dura Ace SRAM Red group set on a crit bike. Yes, it would be nice. I don't feel like it's a necessity, because you're only really using the rear derailleur. So if you can dial in and make sure that you are indexed absolutely bang on, then I think you're going to get the most out of a crit bike. So that's where we're going to save a bit of money today. So I'm not going to take you through all the components that I'm going to put on this bike, but I'm going to show you 2 or 3 things before we get started and throw some weights up on screen so you can kind of see what we're dealing with. Not super end luxury, but definitely not AliExpress. Some of these components are actually quite expensive, and that's kind of what I wanted to do, was blend stuff that's slightly more affordable with stuff that's a bit more high-end, and hopefully that's why I can actually call it the ultimate crit racing bike, because we're not trying to completely cheap out on things. First things first, ceramic bike one bottom bracket. Bottom bracket, once it's in your bike, so annoying to fix, change, make any changes to, so I always like to make sure I get a good one. Now, we're not going with a group set that you might necessarily be 100% familiar with. We're going to use a wheel top on this, primarily because I do just have one at home. So for me, it doesn't mean I've got to go out and buy anything. But I also want to make sure that when you're looking at this bike, it looks awesome. So I found a company called PazQuest, which is a company out of China. And obviously loads of parts will be coming from China to create this. But one part of the industry that they've really got their kind of teeth into is carbon cranks. And I think over the next 12 to 16 months, you are going to see a lot of really good carbon cranks coming out of China. And I've got some PazQuest ones. I've also got some Magene ones, and they look awesome. So I'm hoping I can report back on how they perform once we built this up. Let me show you. So this is the PazQuest carbon crank. It's a 170mm. I've also got an XKD power meter, again another company that's come out of China. These are really light and they come in a dub spindle, so I've got to put a dub spindle through the T45 bottom bracket of the Winspace frame. And then we're going to combine all that with this, which is again a PazQuest chainring 50 tooth. You guys might want to go a bit bigger. I can't push huge watts, and if I do want to swap it out, the fact that this bike is like modular, then I can easily change a chainring, which I can't do on some of my other bikes because I'm running a SRAM Force group set, and it's not so easy to change the chainring when you've got a power meter on it. So now it's time to build this up. First things first, we're going to get the fork all set up with bearings in the frame, cut down the steerer tube. This is not my first time building a bike. That doesn't mean we're not going to come into a few difficulties. Obviously, I pulled the WheelTop group set off another bike about a year ago actually, and then I haven't touched it since. So getting that up and running could be quite interesting. Let's build this. This is not my first time building a bike, but I will say this, anyone can do this. It takes a lot of tools that you probably have lying around, and then a couple of things that you may not have. And that's probably the only tricky bit, is making sure that you have the right tool for the job. Sometimes you're going to have to order it in or borrow it from a bike shop, and I drove to the bike shop a couple of times just to get a few things tightened up that I didn't actually have a tool for. First thing we're going to do is cut down the steerer tube. Now, not really my favorite part of building a bike, but I will say that normally I actually just use a couple of old spacers and some zip ties to cut down my steerer tube. But the first thing we have to do is measure the correct point that we want to cut it down. I would probably say measure twice, cut once, because it's easier to obviously remove more steerer tube and you can't add any back on. So I've gone with a 5mm spacer. All we need to do is just mark it up, cut it off. We've got to account for the bung and then a little bit of extra space for the compression cap to pull on it. It's not my favorite part doing this. So this is the part of the build where I've decided to be, or trying to be, a little bit more economical. We're using the WheelTop group set that I already had. This doesn't retail for huge amounts of money. I think it might even be like $800–900. Don't quote me on that. I'll put a figure on the screen. The thing, I had no problems with it last time I used it. The levers are a little bit smaller than usual. I think it's going to be fine for what I need because it's 40 minutes to an hour crit racing. Just need to make sure that the brakes work though, because that's going to be an issue. Two things you need to do in crit racing: go fast, be able to stop fast. I'm quite looking forward to putting this on and seeing how it actually handles. We have to run the cables, and this is probably the only issue of the build, which is I pulled this off an old bike. So running the cables and then redoing the barbs, I need to make sure I've got the right ones. We'll see, we'll figure it out. This bit is actually super easy, probably the easiest bit of the bike build. I'd probably recommend running the cables before you start mounting the calipers. So cables up through the frame and also through the fork, and then mount your calipers. Also, just make a note when you are doing this of whether you are running 160 or 140s. Maybe you might be running a 160 at the front and a 140 at the rear, which is what I am doing. If you are running 160 and 160, you're probably going to have to use mounting brackets, which should come with the group set that you are buying. Just whack those onto the calipers and then mount them. So I have a mounting bracket on my front fork because I am running a 160 rotor, no mounting bracket on my rear fork because I'm running a 140 rear rotor. One thing we definitely don't want to forget is the insulation, so this doesn't rattle around the frame when we're riding.
Funnily enough, this was actually one of the things that I couldn't be bothered to do, or just didn't buy when I built my SLC that I'm riding at the moment, the SLC3, and it's super annoying. It's very cheap, it's very easy, most bike shops will have it, so even if you don't want to order it online, which you can do, you can just pop down a bike shop and grab it for a couple of quid, but worth it.
Now we can get the fork up into the frame, get the bars at least on the bike, then we can start worrying about everything else. Probably going to leave connecting the brake hoses last, even though I'm going to have to run them through the bar and stem now. The reason I'm leaving them to last is because I don't know whether I've got the right hooks and barbs, and I can't be bothered to spend too much time fussing over it.
Easily one of the most time-consuming parts of a bike build is actually running cables through integrated bar and stems, and I can see why mechanics absolutely hate it. You can use a guide kit, but I actually found that with the Winspace bar and stem, I didn't really need it. It kind of came straight through and out. I was pretty happy with it, so you don't have to worry about it too much. Also, just as a point in case, just make sure that you grease up your bearings that you put onto or your fork in the head tube. So top and bottom, make sure they're fully greased to protect them from the weather.
That was super easy. These are the Winspace SL0 bars. I don't know whether they have channels that guide the cables, but straight through. First time building a bike when that has happened. So I'm thinking there might be internal channels that really guide the cables. I think the Chinese market is just progressing so quickly. Just as I said that, picked up the handlebars and it pulled the front brake cable through and it's disappeared. That's annoying.
Yeah, so don't do that. Just make sure that when you do anything, just be a little bit careful, especially when pulling through cables through the bar and stem. Then just tighten up the bolts once you're all good.
Bung, top cap, loosely tighten it all up.
So once you have snugged everything up, it's time to get the levers on. Now the wheeltop levers are just a little bit smaller than SRAM Shimano, which basically means when you're up on the hoods, there's not a huge amount for your palms to rest on. It's one of my small concerns about running this group set. I also had to order a new set of barbs and olives from China. I think it cost me £16. I did it on AliExpress and took maybe 6-8 days to arrive.
One of my favorite bits on a bike build is the bottom bracket. This is T47, I'm pretty sure, with a dub, so I can put my SRAM group set on, but we're going to be using the PazQuest carbon cranks with the XKD power meter. This is a nice bit of kit. Not cheap, nice.
This is a Bike One threaded T47 bottom bracket made out of aluminium, so it's nice, firm, strong, and really well weather sealed ceramic bearings. It's threaded, so just make sure you grease everything up. I did run into a rather unique problem when I was setting up the cranks and the chainring. I had to put it all together and I just didn't have one tool that was going to tighten the cranks to the chainring. So luckily enough, I did have a second set of Magene cranks that already had a power meter installed lying around. So I swapped it out to use that, but the tool wouldn't have been hard to get hold of.
This is going to be so bling. How cool is that? One thing we've had to do very quickly is swap out the cranks, simply because I didn't have the right tool to install the PazQuest ones. This is building a bike. So this one, the power meter was already attached, so all I had to do was put both of the chainrings on and we're good to go. So let's get this on the bike.
Something that was really important to me when I was building this bike or choosing what I was going to put on it was I wanted it to be modular. What do I mean by that? I want to be able to swap in and swap out parts. So let's just say you guys tell me that my chainring, the 50 tooth, is too small. I want to be able to just easily swap in and swap out. Now I have a SRAM Force group set on my other bike and you cannot change the power meter chainring without sending it back to SRAM and them doing it for you. So the fact that all these components can hopefully be easily swapped in, change the crank length, easy, no problem. And guys, I am really looking forward to testing out these carbon cranks. I think you guys are going to be hearing a lot about them. Now, to fit the rear and the front derailleur, obviously the rear derailleur is fine. I'm going to have to index that at a separate point, and WheelTop does have an app that I'll have to get my teeth into. But I use a SRAM front derailleur guide, basically, that I have lying around because I've previously installed, obviously, a SRAM Groupset. So it's come in pretty handy to just kind of throw on the chainring and use it as like a loose guide for setting up the front derailleur. Now, the build comes together pretty quickly from this point on, and it starts looking like an actual bike. Now, the seat post on the T1550 Gen 2 uses an interesting system. Basically, it involves a clamp that bites into the carbon. The only problem is that the UK roads are pretty horrible, and I've pretty much never ridden one like that where it hasn't slipped.
Would you believe it? You're joining me 2 weeks later because I needed some extra parts, which were the olive and the barbs for the WheelTop Groupset, so that I could connect it up, so I could connect up the hydraulic hoses. It's the only thing. It took me 2 weeks off AliExpress, but we've got them now. Let's get this bad boy finished up. So close to being finished now, so close. If I'm 100% honest, I don't really want to consult a manual, so I'm just going to kind of wing it. I know that you put something on, the bolt on, then you put the washery thing on, then the olive goes in, then you connect it all up. Can't be that hard, right?
I have a feeling that this is probably the part that most people are probably a little bit more anxious about, which is connecting up the hydraulic hoses. It's super easy, like barely an inconvenience. It does help if you have one of these little barb inserter, olive inserter things. I got that off AliExpress for like £6. 100% recommend having one. And I don't like buying tools. I don't like having loads of tools lying around, but it did make it super easy. If I hadn't taken this Groupset off another bike, then I wouldn't have to bleed the brakes, but because I've pulled it off and lost some of the brake fluid, I am going to have to bleed them at some point.
So why we're going to call that a job well done? Because they're on and they're working. Hydraulic hoses, perfect. They are going to need bleeding. So you also would have thought that in the 2 weeks that it took me to wait for the WheelTop olive and barbs, I probably could have got some bar tape, but I didn't bother. So that's it. Next time you see me, this bike is going to be up on the road. Ladies and gentlemen, that is how you build a crit bike, I think. We're going to say that is job done for now on the build, because we are up and running. It's just going to be about dialing everything in from saddle angles, height. Gonna have to sort out and bleed the brakes, but other than that, I think we're pretty good to go. I didn't realize it at the time, but I have built a China bike. Winspace with the Magene cranks, and then the PazQuest rotor, and then I put the WheelTop Groupset on it. So it's pretty much all Chinese components, which I'm actually really happy with. And also, yeah, the rear cassette is Neutron as well. So I didn't realize it because I wasn't trying to build a Chinese bike. I was trying to build an expensive version of a reasonably priced crit bike, as in, how can you do it really well without just spending £11,000 getting yourself a Dogma or an S-Works? And this is what we've come out with, and I will go through the full pricing of this on another video. I think that's going to wrap it up for this one. I'm looking forward to riding it. I think it's going to be it's going to be a lot of fun. It's just a shame that the season is over. Guys, thanks for joining in. Please do like and subscribe, and I'll see you on another one soon.